Fanduel recently came out with their 2025 Big Ten season over-under win totals. Is your team going over or is your team going under? If I had to spend money and put down money right now, where would I go? You're going to find out. This is Big Nation.
From Pasadena to Piscataway, College Park to the Coliseum, Seattle to State College, Columbus to Camp Randall, the Zoo to the Rock, and everywhere in between. This is where Big Ten fans gather to talk America's premier national conference with your host, Big Ten Ted. All Big Ten, all year long. This is Big Nation.
Disclaimer, an obvious disclaimer. These are certainly not predictions. These are certainly not final. But if I had to put down money right here and right now, and it would be foolish on April Fool's Day to maybe put down money on every single one of these over-unders, but if I had to do it, these are the directions I would certainly go right here and right now. I had 10 teams going over and 8 teams going under. So I'm pretty split, I think, on all of these right now. Let's start at the top of the conference with the teams that FanDuel has set at a 10.5 over-under win total. We start with the defending national champion Ohio State Buckeyes, 2 new coordinators and a lot of new personnel on this team. Like, you specifically look at defense, they're bringing in a entirely new defensive line. I mean, you still got Caleb Downs on this team. I think Davis Enigbenosin is also back in that defensive backfield, but there's going to be a lot of new pieces. Matt Patricia, I'm not a huge fan of Matt Patricia, but he's taken over that defense. We'll see what he can do with his former NFL pedigree with the New England Patriots and the Detroit Lions as well. You look to offense, and I think that this offense could be one of the best, if not the best, passing attack in all of college football this season. You've got Julian Sand throwing the ball to Jeremiah Smith, to Brandon Ennis, to Carnell Tate. Max Clare transfers in from Purdue, a great pass-catching tight end over there. Even though you have Brian Hartline, who's a first-year offensive coordinator, we don't know how he's going to be as a play caller. I think there's enough talent around them they'll figure it out, and they're going to be just fine, certainly. But I have actually them going under that 10.5 win total right now, and I'm going to tell you why. They open up the season, albeit at home, but they open up the season with maybe the national championship favorite in the Texas Longhorns. Like, they don't get to warm up against Toledo. They don't get to warm up against Western Michigan. Like, they don't get those games with all these new personnel and coaches and all that. They don't get time to gel. They got to play one of the toughest teams in the SEC. They got to play one of the toughest teams in all of college football right away from the jump. And that is going to be a very difficult task, even though that game is going to be in the horseshoe. And then you look to the end of the season. Until proven otherwise, I'm going with Michigan. That's just the way it's been. They are inside the heads of the Buckeyes, no question about it, right now, considering the result at the end of last season. I think Michigan is going to be a much better football team. Ohio State is a little bit more human, certainly this season. So right then and there, Texas and Michigan, right off the bat, you could say, all right, that makes sense. There's your under. But this is also a team on November 1st. They got to play a really good Penn State team. Now, I'm going to flip this back on its head, back the other way. Penn State, until proven otherwise, I'm not sure if they can go into Columbus, Ohio, and defeat the Ohio State Buckeyes, but that is still going to be a difficult challenge for the Buckeyes of Ohio State. And watch out for October 11th, going to Illinois. Illinois is a sneaky team. We'll see how that one certainly ends up. But I think this could be another 10-2 playoff type of season for the Ohio State Buckeyes, and maybe just like last year, they're turning it around and turning it on right at the right time. Let's talk about the Nittany Lions of Penn State, and I've got this one going under as well. Look, I know they were number 1 in my way too early Big Ten power rankings, but really ever since then, I've kind of did a little bit more research on Penn State, and I've really thought about Penn State really more than anything right now. And the more I think about it, the more that this Penn State team, although very experienced with Aller coming back, the 2 running backs coming back, and some other pieces on defense certainly coming back, they're a very experienced football team. But I kind of start to look around, and it looks a lot like a Penn State team of what we've seen under James Franklin these last couple of years. And what has that been? That's been like a 10-2 type of football team. And right now, maybe that's where I've got Penn State if I'm throwing my money around right here and right now. Like, one key thing to keep in mind is how big Tyler Warren was in terms of the offensive production that Penn State put on the field last year. And they don't have that. They're bringing in two receivers that they hope can be better, but nothing, of course, is guaranteed. So I don't know how much they're losing Abdul Carter on defense. I don't know how much different Penn State is going to be this next season. You look at the Nittany Lions and what has kind of been their MO from a schedule standpoint, some of the games that they've played. They beat all the teams that they should beat, and they lose to all of the teams that are elite or better than them. And you look at the schedule for Penn State, is you have a home game against the Oregon Ducks on September 27th. They're going to be right in the Big Ten championship conversation. They are going to be in the college football playoff conversation. No question about that. At Ohio State, as I previously mentioned, on November 1st, like boom, 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 right then and there, you could throw out your 10-2. I think two other games that I would keep an eye on that are sneaky. At Iowa on October 18th, the last time Penn State went to Kinnick Stadium, they were a top 5 team in 2021, and they fell at the hands of Iowa. That is a tough place to play. Indiana on November 8th, that one's in Happy Valley, but maybe that could give them a little bit of trouble certainly as well. But right now, I think I'm feeling a little bit under on the Nittany Lions if I'm throwing my money around right now. Let's talk about the Oregon Ducks, the defending Big Ten champion. Out of all of the 10.5, this one's going over, not necessarily because I believe that Oregon is a better team than Penn State or Ohio State. They certainly could be that type of football team, but I think the schedule is very favorable for them. They go to Penn State on September 27th, and that's really the only game where there is a significant challenge. And I know Oregon is a young, maybe a little bit of an inexperienced, although looks to be very talented football team. They're going to have 4 games to kind of get under their belt, work out some of the kinks before they go on the road to take on Penn State. So they might have some things fairly confident at that point in time. November 8th at Iowa is a little bit tricky, but you kind of look at the rest of the schedule. Dan Lanning's MO as part of Oregon has kind of been, he doesn't really get upset. Right? There haven't been a lot of upsets. The losses that he's had, it's been to good ranked teams during his time in Eugene. So I think I'm going over. I feel really good about an 11-1 type of season for the Oregon Ducks, certainly right now. Let's head to the next group. And this one is 2 teams slated there at 8.5 and 1 at 7.5. Let's start with the Indiana Hoosiers. Fanduel has them at 8.5. That is a perfect line for the Cream and Crimson right now because I think that they are an 8 or a 9 win football team. Like when I look at their roster and I look at their talent, I think it's very comparable to where it was last year. Like you lose Curtis Rourke, quarterback, you bring in Fernando Mendoza. Some people might say that's an upgrade. Some people, at the very least, it's comparable to what it was last season. You bring back your 2 leading receivers from a year ago. You reload on the running back room. You bring in Pat Coogan on the offensive line. You return 3 starters up front. You maybe defense, you lose a decent amount of guys, but you still bring back some players at each level of your defense that were big impact players in that unit last season. But this is a more difficult schedule for Indiana, no question about it right now. I think I would go over right now. I could very well see under, like I said, teetering on that 8 or 9 win level right now. September 20th and September 27th, I think, is the key pivot point, whether this team wins 8 games or 9 games. That's versus Illinois. The next week is at Iowa. Right now, I think that's split city. I think you win one, you lose one. Like October 11th, you go to Oregon. November 8th, you travel on the road to Penn State. Like you look at the rest of the schedule for Indiana right now, Michigan State, UCLA, Wisconsin at home, Purdue and Maryland on the road. It is decently favorable to be able to build yourself up to possibly get that over to maybe get the 9 wins, and that's where I've got the Hoosiers right now. The Michigan Wolverines, I came very close to this being a hammer the over type of situation, but I saved it for somebody else in this group right now, because I kind of look at the schedule and, if Bryce Underwood maybe takes a little bit getting adapted to the college game, I think reports out of Ann Arbor is he's going to be just fine. But, if certain pieces of this team take a little bit of gelling, a little bit of getting used to, I could see 4 losses on the schedule. Remember, September 6th, they go on the road to Oklahoma. That's a big pivot point. If they lose that game, you're at Nebraska, at USC, you got Ohio State on the schedule as well. But you kind of look past that for Michigan. Wisconsin, Washington, Purdue are at home, like Northwestern and Maryland. Like, they're drawing the bottom of the Big Ten. They're drawing the bottom of the Big Ten right here. So I think that this is a very favorable schedule. No Oregon on this schedule, no Penn State on this schedule. This is a really good draw. I've said it in the past. I think this is a college football playoff schedule if everything comes together for Sharon Moore and the Michigan Wolverines right now. I'm confident in this over right now, especially if they can beat Oklahoma early in the season in that Big Ten versus SEC showdown. Folks, get out your hammers. Hammer the over on the Illinois Fighting Illini. It's 7.5, and folks, it is downright disrespectful. This was a 9-3 team in the regular season, beating South Carolina in the bowl game to win 10 games in Champaign, Illinois. And Illinois is bringing just about everybody back. Luke Altmaier at quarterback, a cluster of guys on the offensive line led by J.C. Davis. You look at guys like Xavier Scott and Gabe Akis on the defensive side of the football, a defensive unit that was really good under Aaron Henry last season. Like, this is going to be a very, very good football team. I think it would take injuries to get them below that 7.5 mark. They've got a favorable schedule right now, like at Indiana on September 20th. USC, Ohio State is on this schedule. Like, outside of that, you don't have Penn State on this schedule, no Michigan on this schedule, no Oregon on this schedule, like no Iowa on this schedule. This is a very favorable route for the orange and blue to possibly work their way into a college football playoff spot when all is said and done. So get out your hammers, put your money down right now on the over for the Illinois Fighting Illini. If there's one thing we know about Brett Bielema, right, he always overproduces. He can really get the most out of a football team, and I could certainly see a 9-win season. Once again, I could see a 10-win season certainly here for the Illinois Fighting Illini. I think the ceiling for Illinois could be 11-1. next season. I am that confident in what Illinois has. I think some people, when they look at the Illini, they're probably, well, they lose Pat Bryant, they lose Zachary Franklin. Who are they going to replace them with? Hey, maybe you're not going to have a top 5 Big Ten wide receiver like you did last season with Pat Bryant, but this is going to be another really, really good football team. I am very confident in that. Get out your hammer. Hammer that right now. Let's head to the next group of teams. And this is like when I was putting these over-unders, I edited the graphic. I did over, I did under, and I switched it back and forth between a whole bunch of these teams. Let's start first with the Iowa Hawkeyes at 7.5, as every team in this group is right now. I've got the over because when I look at Iowa's schedule and I look at the Iowa football team for 2025, I see a lot of close games on this schedule. September 6th at Iowa State, September 27th versus Indiana, October 25th versus Minnesota, November 15th at USC, November 28th at Nebraska. Like, those are all games that I think could go either way. When you look at close games, and when you look at Kirk Ferentz, and when you look at the Iowa Hawkeyes, you get them in a one-possession game in the fourth quarter. A lot of times, they find ways to pull out those games. That's why I'm going over right now with Iowa. Nebraska, I'm going the other way. I'm going under. Now, I could very well see this going over. Like, Nebraska is one of those teams. We'll talk about USC here in just a minute. But when I look at the Nebraska Cornhuskers for 2025, like, I think there's a wide range of what this football team could be. Like, I think for Nebraska to really be successful next season, Dylan and Dana need to click. Because you look to the defensive side of the football, they lose a lot of beef, so to speak, up front on the defensive line, and they lose some good pass rushers as well. Now they bring in some good transfers, but I just don't think this defense, you lose a coordinator in Tony White, I just don't know if this defense can really get back to maybe the level that it was. Maybe it can, but right now, and they got a lot of guys returning back there in the secondary, but none of them really stand out to me as super great all-conference type of performers back there for the Huskers right now. So we talked about the close game success that Iowa has had. Nebraska has not had that same success, certainly right now. Like, you look at some of these games, September 20th versus Michigan, October 18th at Minnesota, November 1st against USC, November 22nd at Iowa, or at Penn State, I should say, November 28th versus Iowa. Like, that's 5 games right there. I'm not as high on Nebraska right now as I have been in previous years. A lot of pressure is going onto Dylan Raiola's shoulders right now. Now, another team that is very unpredictable, man, it's the USC Trojans. This could be another 6-win season. It could be a 9-win season. It could be a 10-win season. I don't know. I don't know right now about this USC Trojans team. Like, you look to the quarterback position, and previously I've held the thought that Jaden Mayava is going to be inconsistent. I don't see him as a quarterback that's really going to be a plus player and that makes good, sound decisions consistently. But then maybe now I think about it on the flip side is, hey, he got thrown into the situation last year. He did look good at times, but yeah, he did cost his team some games with some interceptions, especially that Notre Dame game at the end of the year. Well, they do have 2 really good receivers to throw to, and Jacoby Lane, Mekhi Lemon. You throw in Lake McCree in there as well. Well, maybe the offensive line won't be good again because they're losing 3 starters. They're replacing them with transfers that aren't necessarily an upgrade right now. I think the defense, one thing I feel confident about, I think the defense is going to continue to get better. So I think there is a lot of give and take here. I don't really know where it's going to go for the USC Trojans, but I got it going over. Maybe just slightly with like an 8th win right now, but September 27th at Illinois, October 11th against Michigan, October 18th at Notre Dame, November 22nd at Oregon are 4 very difficult games. I think outside of that group, USC is going to have to take care of business against the teams that they have better rosters than. They didn't exactly do that last season. Some games at Nebraska versus Iowa. Like, those are games that I think you got to wrap up and be able to win if you're the USC Trojans. But I think they can win one of that group. Maybe the Illinois game or maybe the Michigan game. The games on the road in South Bend and Eugene don't really stand out to me as winnable games right now for the USC Trojans. But I think they can go over. For me, it's all about like 2026, 2027, 2028. The way USC is recruiting right now, the way they're building, I think this certainly is going to be a team to be reckoned with in the future. I went under for the Washington Huskies right now at 7.5. Look, when I look at Washington, I really like Damon Williams at quarterback. I think people that don't know his name, they're going to know his name by probably the middle of the season. Jonah Coleman, a 1,000-yard back coming back. I think they got good wide receivers. They even got like good defensive backs on the defensive side, but still, line of scrimmage. I think the line of scrimmage is going to continue to be a problem for the Washington Huskies right now. I can't go over. I can't. I mean, they got Ohio State, at Michigan, home against Illinois, home against Oregon. Like, those are difficult games, especially Buckeyes, Wolverines, and Ducks certainly on there. And then you got to factor in the game that they lost last year on Washington State. Yes, I know that Jake Dickert is gone, at Wisconsin, at UCLA. Like, those feel like toss-up 50-50 type of football game for the Washington Huskies. So I just can't go to 8-4 as long as the line of scrimmage the way it is in Seattle, Washington right now. Let's head to the next group of teams. Let's get back out our hammers because we need to hammer the over on the Minnesota Golden Gophers. Fanduel has them at 6.5 right now. Now, will I come out and say that it's disrespectful like I did for Illinois? Yeah, maybe it's a little bit disrespectful. Maybe not as disrespectful maybe as it is for the Illini right now. But this is a team that PJ Fleck always seems to, like, we talk about Brett Bielema and getting a lot out of his football team. PJ Fleck does the most with the least, I believe, in the Big Ten. And for them to go under, I think it would have to really venture against the trend of what PJ has been able to establish in Dinkytown right now. I think one good thing about their schedule is their two really tough, not winnable games are on the road at Ohio State and at Oregon, which means what? You get a lot of those 50-50 games in Minneapolis. Nebraska is at home. Michigan State is at home. Wisconsin is at home. And then when you look to that other level of games that they have this year, Rutgers, Purdue, Northwestern, they draw teams maybe towards the bottom of the Big Ten Conference this year. So like Minnesota, I could very well see being like an 8-win, maybe even a 9-win football team. I know a lot of concern surrounds the quarterback position with Drake Lindsey. Vegas had Minnesota at a 4.5 win total last season, and they surpassed that by multiple games. I think we could see a very similar result with the Golden Gophers, certainly this season as well. Let's head to the Wisconsin Badgers, their rival. Boy, they're at 5.5. I've actually got them going under. I try to remain optimistic. I try to remain positives, especially surrounding the teams that I like. I grew up liking Wisconsin more than any other team. Yet another transfer quarterback coming in. You got a new coordinator. The new coordinator, Jeff Grimes, like to run the football, a little bit more physicality on his football team, but it's still a little bit of a new offensive system and scheme. We'll see how long that really takes to get into the swing of things right now. You look to defense, they got all transfers on the defensive line. I look at all three levels. I think they got some decent, good players in the secondary, but I'm unimpressed. I'm unimpressed with what they have on defense, and the schedule is it's a flat-out murder show. It's a flat-out Netflix murder show of a schedule. September 13th at Alabama, October 4th at Michigan, October 11th versus Iowa, October 18th versus Ohio State. Deep breath. Whew. October 25th at Oregon, but it doesn't stop there. Like when they get into the month of November, how about Indiana on the road, followed by Illinois at home, followed by Minnesota on the road? I'm sorry, but I right now, if I'm putting down money, I'm putting down money for the Wisconsin Badgers to fail to get a bowl game for the second consecutive year. And it's not necessarily Luke Fickell's fault. It's not necessarily Wisconsin's fault. You look at their roster, and if they had like an easier schedule, this could maybe be a 7 or an 8-win football team. But when you get into the super conference era, you get schedules like this. Let's get back to some positivity. And I've got some positivity about the 5.5 surrounding the Michigan State Spartans. I've got them going over. I think if I'm putting money down right now, I think they get to a bowl game. I'm putting faith into Jonathan Smith that he will continue to build what is happening there in East Lansing. Aiden Childs is coming back. Nick Marsh is coming back. Jack Velling is coming back. A second year of Joe Rossi as the defensive coordinator. I just think this is going to be a program that is going to make incremental improvements year by year by year. It's not going to be huge improvements. Like you've seen some teams within the Big Ten that, hey, they'll take a 3 or a 4 or 5, whatever game jump ahead. I don't think that's Michigan State. I think this is one game here, 1 year. It's 2 games. Maybe the next year, like this is going to, we know this. We saw how we build it up at Oregon State. I think he's building it up, certainly, and building with Aiden Childs upon the foundation that is there. They had the 3rd least transfers in the Big Ten last year. Retainment is extremely key to building a Big Ten football team right now, and that's what they have. Like, you look at their schedule, they avoid some of the big-time powers in the Big Ten on their schedule this season. They avoid Oregon. They avoid Ohio State and teams like that. At USC, at Nebraska, at Indiana, at Minnesota, at Iowa are some of those games that some of them maybe could go either way. Remember, this is a Michigan State team that beat the Iowa Hawkeyes last season. So I think there's a good amount of games that people aren't necessarily thinking would be 50-50 games right now as we begin April. But I think this Michigan State team is a team that's maybe lying in the weeds. Not a lot of people are talking about, and their schedule is very manageable where they could certainly get that over. And then once they get those extra bowl practices, that's really going to help the development of that football team over there. Rutgers is a team that's sitting there at 5.5. They have made 2 consecutive bowl berths. If I'm putting down money right now, I would say that streak ends at 2 years. Like when I look at the Rutgers Scarlet Knights, I know Wisconsin has probably the most difficult schedule in the Big Ten. I would say the second most difficult schedule is Rutgers. And Rutgers loses their great running back, Kyle Monungai. Like Kyle Monungai was such a huge part of their offensive production. I look at their receivers, not great. I look at Ethan Kaliakmanis coming back at quarterback. I see a meh sandwich. That's what I see. They were very experienced on the defensive side last year, and they lose a lot of that experience. And the defense last year wasn't all that great, right? They bring in good transfers. Like they have one of the highest rated transfer classes in the Big Ten right now, and they're gonna have to hope that a lot of those guys click. But circling back to the schedule, this is October 18th home against Oregon. November 1st is at Illinois. November 22nd at Ohio State. How about November 29th versus Penn State? Like right off the bat, that seems like 4 L's for the Scarlet Knights. And you look at Iowa, at Minnesota, at Washington as well. I think Rutgers is a team where I don't know if you can chalk up 6 or 7 wins every single year. Like Northwestern is kind of another program like, hey, they're going to go down a little bit and then they're going to come back up. Like that's what we can expect, I think, from the Scarlet Knights from a year-by-year basis. Let's finish with the teams that are either 4.5 or 3.5. You know, Maryland is a team that's been trending down since Taulia Tagovailoa left campus there in College Park, and it's a very confusing time, I think, to be a Terrapin fan because, hey, Justin Martin's at quarterback. You kind of been losing some of those weapons that they've had on the outside. They've had great defensive backs over the last handful of years as well. It's just that talent doesn't seem to be there. Certainly, Justin Martin is a question mark at quarterback. We'll see if maybe Malik Washington, the great true freshman, really gets in and is able to step up. And that kind of leads into another point of why this is a confusing time is because they have a commitment, a shutdown recruitment from the top player in the entire country in the class of 2026. 5-star plus tackle Emmanuel Iheanacho is also possibly looking at going to Maryland. Like they're recruiting their area extremely well right now. Will Mike Loxley be there to coach this town in the future? That's a big question that's looming over the Terps right now. The non-conference could see them going 3-0, but you need 2 conference wins for the Terps. I think your best bets for conference wins are Wisconsin on the road, UCLA on the road, Rutgers on the road, and a neutral site against Michigan State. So I think your best bets are away from College Park, and that might be a little bit difficult for you, certainly. UCLA is a very interesting team because I think with Joey Aguilar coming in as the transfer quarterback, with Tino Sinceri coming in as the offensive coordinator, I think that this passing attack could certainly be bolstered. I've got them going over right now. I think they could go over and possibly win 5 games. Do I see them getting to a bowl game? I don't know if I would go that far right now because there's a lot of questions on the defensive side of the football. But the non-conference will go a long way to determining whether UCLA can hit this over or not. Home game against Utah at UNLV. That's a Dan Mullen coach team now. Home against New Mexico. Penn State, Ohio State, Indiana are tough games, but you look at some of these other games and at Northwestern, home against Maryland, like those could be winnable games right there for the Bruins. You get a home game at the Rose Bowl against Washington, Michigan State, Nebraska. Maybe you can work in some victories there. So if you lose one game in your non-conference, you got to win 2 other games or 3 other games to win that. Northwestern, Maryland, and then one of those other 3. It's a possibility that could happen, but I'm optimistic of what Deshaun Foster is building in Westwood right now. Northwestern, this is a team that can be up. This is a team that can also be down, certainly, and they were down last year. Is this year going to be the up? Maybe it's not going to be the up like we've seen in past years for the Wildcats, but of course, Preston Stone, the quarterback coming in, which version of Preston Stone are we going to get? That's going to determine a lot, I think, for the Wildcats going forward. But that season opener at Tulane, I think, is going to be a big swing point, whether they get over that 3.5 or not. But they got a game against Louisiana Monroe, Purdue, and UCLA. Those could be victories. I like some of the pieces that they have on the defensive side of the football. They have a lack of receivers, I think, for Preston Stone to throw to. So when Northwestern does have success, a lot of times we sit here in April and May and June, July, and August, and we say, oh, look at that team. They're only going to win 3 or 4 games, and they end up winning 6 or 7. That's just the way it is sometimes with that team in Evanston. Going to finish things off with Purdue. I've got them going under the 3.5 as we sit right now. Like Ball State, Southern Illinois should be wins, but their other non-conference game is going on the road to play the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Look, there's so much newness. There's so much change. I believe in Barry Odom that he's eventually going to build a winner, whatever a winner looks like in West Lafayette, maybe consistently getting to bowl games or being in that area, something like that. But I think this year you need to just start building. Like, you get to 3-9, that's a 2-game improvement. I know Purdue fans might not want to hear it, but that would be a step in the right direction. Northwestern and Rutgers, possibility of Big Ten win. So if you can win those 2 non-conference games that I talked about and you win those 2 games, all of a sudden you're looking at it over. But right now, if I'm a Purdue fan, I don't know how high I'm putting my expectations. An improvement is certainly all I'm looking for right now in West Lafayette, Indiana. We got a long way to go, and I'm sure I'm going to change my mind on a lot of these over-unders. And I'm sure a lot of these over-unders are also going to change themselves. What are your thoughts? How many of these do you agree on? How many of these do you disagree on? Who do you think's going over? Who do you think's going under? Leave all of that in the comments below. I'm Big Ten Ted. We'll see you in the next one.
Thank you for watching and listening to Big Nation. Make sure to subscribe and follow Big Ten Ted on X, YouTube, and podcast platforms to stay in the know on all things Big Ten football.